Now we're going to add a menu to our game. I find that it's easiest to put a menu in relatively early, so that way we can choose which level we want to be in and start to think about our players' data persistence across levels because we'll already have that starting area. So we're going to begin by creating a new scene. We'll choose File and New Scene, and I'm going to go with the Lit 2D URP option. We'll choose Create, and then I'm going to save this by hitting Control S into our Scenes folder and name it Menu with a capital M. Now that I've got my menu, I want to do a couple things. I want to put a background in there and then put a couple buttons in there. First, let's pull in the background. You should be able to download that on the page below. And then once you've got it downloaded, get it onto your clipboard. Just right click on it and hit copy. Now let's go into the art and backgrounds folders. I'm going to right click, hit show in Explorer to pop up that window. And then I'll paste it right inside this backgrounds folder. Hit Control V and I should see my background appear here any second now. There it is, and then we'll jump back over to Unity, and my new background is in. So when I drop this background in, I don't want to just drag it and pop it out there, because I want to do this as a UI element. And if I do that, drop it out there, it instead uses a sprite renderer and a sprite element, and doesn't work with canvases and the UI stuff that I want to use. So I'm going to delete this sprite renderer. We're going to go to Game Object, UI, and then choose Image. Now that I've got an image here, I'm going to assign it. So I'll expand out this image section, the image component. I'm going to collapse the rect transform for just a moment. And then I'll assign the background to this sprite of the image. If it doesn't allow me to assign it, I can always go over to the texture, make sure that it's click on that background there and make sure that it's set to sprite, 2D, and UI and not default. If it's set to default, it won't allow you to drop it in there. Now I'm going to go select that image again, and we want this to be bigger. I want this to fill my entire background. So I'm going to go to the rect transform, and we'll click right here at this anchor part where you've got the part that says middle and center, and it's going to give us this anchor presets option. I want to do this thing up here where it says hold shift to also set the pivot and hold alt to set the position. So I'm going to hold alt and shift, and then look at what happens. It's telling me what it's going to do. As I hold Alt, it's telling me, hey, this is going to set the position up to the top left. So I can hold Alt and click that and it'll move it up. But I also want the pivot to be up at the top left. I don't want this position to be based off the center. I want the position to be based off the top left of this icon. So I'm going to hold Shift and mark that pivot as well. So now I've got a 0, 0 position and it's set to a width of 100 and 100. That's not what I want though. I don't want it up in the corner. I want to fill my whole screen. So I could do maybe this stretch one right here to stretch it, but that just goes across the top. You might have guessed which one is going to stretch across the full screen. It's this bottom right one. You hit that and it's going to stretch and take up the entire screen. Now that we've kind of got an idea of how to stretch and set up some images, let's add a button. We're going to add a button that's going to go up in the top left. It's going to be a level 1 button. So I'm going to right click on the canvas, go to UI, and we're going to choose Button Text Mesh Pro. When I click this, it's going to give me the TMP importer, and I'm going to need to click on both of these buttons. First, the Import TMP Essentials, which is importing the Text Mesh Pro, or the very nice version of text for Unity, into our game. Not every game needs it, so it's not included by default, but most games need text, so it's something that you're probably going to want to pull in 9 out of 10 times. Now that I've got the essentials in, I'm going to import the examples and extras. Let's go to the Text Mesh Pro folder first, though, and take a look. If you look here, I've got documentation, fonts, resources, shaders, and sprites. There's a little bit of stuff here. There's not a whole lot, though. There's one font if I go into the fonts and materials, and then there are a couple settings for the font. But if I hit the import examples and extras, this is going to pull in a whole bunch of extra fonts, well, like 5 or 6 different fonts, and some really cool examples that show how to do some interesting different types of things with text that you can only do with Text Mesh Pro. So I've got those both imported, and I'm going to go over to my button. My button right now is placed right in the center. You can kind of see it there. It's this boring little kind of default looking like the 90s button. I want to make it bigger and dock it to the top left. So the first thing I'm going to do is adjust the width. I'm going to make it 600 wide and make it 100 tall. Then I'm going to change the color. I'm going to just click the color dropper right here, the eyedropper on the sprite, or on the image. If you don't see this, make sure you expand out the image. So hit the eyedropper, and I'm going to go with a color that looks like, let's see. Let's just type in the color here. I'm going to go with a color that looks like about this. So put in a 7B, D253, or right around here on your kind of green. Something that looks kind of greenish. It doesn't have to be the exact same color, but some sort of a green. Now I want to change the pivot of it, or the location. So I'm going to click on the anchor tool. Remember, hold Alt and Shift, just like it says, Alt and Shift, and hit the top left. Now, I don't want this anchored all the way to the top left. I do want to move it over a little bit, have it maybe 50 pixels over and 50 pixels down. So grab this X position and just drag it till it looks about right. See if 50 seems like a good number. So then I'll just type in a 50 to make it nice and round. And do the same with the Y. I'll just grab it and drag it down till it's looking good. So maybe, I think negative 50 seems good too. So I'll just go with 50 and a negative 50. Last thing I want to do to this button is make it, well, not the last thing, but the next thing I want to do to this button is make the text not just say button, make it say level 1 and make it look nice and pretty. I said that we brought in that Text Mesh Pro thing. We didn't actually use it yet. It just kind of appeared and made an ugly text under here. So let's expand out our button. Click the little arrow here, and underneath it, you'll see that we've got the text TMP, which again is just short for Text Mesh Pro. It's because there used to be two text systems. There was an old text that didn't look as pretty, and then there's the new Text Mesh Pro that's been around since like 2016 or 18 or something like that, and it is now the default. You should always use this, not the old one. So we've got our text TMP object here, and it has the word button here in its text. If I expand out the Text Mesh Pro, if you don't see this area here, just make sure that you expand it. You might just see the shader down below. So if I expand this out, I see the word button. I want to replace that with level 1. And then I want to replace the font. I'm going to choose the font asset here. If I click on it, I can see that it goes and selects it. That's not the folder that the one that I want is in though. So I'm just going to hit the little search box, the little button there, and then we'll go find the Bangers font. This looks a lot different, but if I hit the auto size, you'll see, let's see, auto size. Okay, I hit auto size, but for some reason my auto size options are wrong, and my max value is set to 0. So I'm going to set this to a 200. That's actually never happened before where I've seen that, where it popped up and had an invalid max auto size. Didn't happen last time I did this. So if you do see that, just make sure that you put it up to it. But it should say 72 by default. So if you see a 72 here, just change this up to something like a 200, and we'll get a nice big font size of, it looks like about a 94. I can turn off auto size also and just kind of hard code it at what I want, but I like auto size because it fills it into the right spot, or the right size for what I want. Now I'm going to change the color of this text by clicking the vertex color and just make it white. And finally, I want to add an outline. There are a couple ways to do this. I can go down into the shader options here and find the where's outline? Right here, outline option, and just drag up this thickness. But that's going to change all of the text in this Bangers font to do that. Instead, what I can do and what I want to do is use the material preset. So underneath the font asset, there are a couple different presets for this font. There's a drop shadow, an outline, a glow, and a logo. If I choose the outline one, I think that looks pretty good, and I've got a decent looking level 1 button. So I'm going to rename my button to be level 1 button, and then I'm going to duplicate it and make a level 2 button. So I hit Control D or Command D, then I'll rename this second button from level 1 button 1 to level 2 button. And then I'm going to move the Y position down. So I'll just drag it down. Let's see what looks good. Oh, about a negative 200 probably is looking about right. And then we'll change the text here to say level 2. All right, we'll save our scene. And before we add in any functionality, I just want to save this off and get it committed. So go into Plastic, and we've added Text Mesh Pro, and we've also added a bunch of fonts. So I'm going to make sure that everything is checked. So say added Text Mesh Pro and extras plus menu scene with level buttons. And we'll check those changes in.